I am an instrument of the Emperor's will, Trooper. Now indicate to me the nearest concentration of orcs.
Aye, my lord. Masses plasma.
We all know that killing is bad. We humans tend to try not to inflict suffering upon one another. And I can say pretty certainly that most of us don't follow through on our desires to unleash the hounds upon a troublesome coworker or classmate because we fear the inevitably dangerous consequences. After all, force answers force, war breeds war, and death only brings death. While we all want those things to keep their distance from us, everybody will try to get away from their violent power fantasies, whether it's by masturbating furiously while punching the wall, calling people fags in Counter-Strike, or electing spiteful, fear-mongering politicians. My point is that there are plenty of ways to soothe a seemingly insatiable bloodthirst. Few, I might add, are as effective, as satisfying, or as fun as Warhammer 40,000's Space Marine. Space Marine places you in the role of Ultramarine Captain Titus, a transhuman super soldier who has to help defend a human world from an orc invasion. Along the way through the campaign, you'll accomplish your task by rending, shooting, and detonating pretty much everything that has a circulatory system. And while just about every other shooter has this basic premise, after all there's not much else to it in most shooters, not so many actually rely on it. Space Marine is about getting down and dirty, running into swarms of 50-odd orcs or other creatures more or less, blowing a few of their limbs or heads clean off, and swiping at them with a selection of melee weapons that makes you wonder, why the hell haven't these things been invented yet? And the use of swarms is effective not only as a violent stimulus, but as a wonderful challenge. As in pretty much every swarm shooter, the enemies aren't all that smart or powerful, but instead they present a danger to you in the way they move about, surround you, and attack. There's not a Doom-like variety of monsters here, but what the game has is more than enough to keep you cautious and aware. There are often quite a few enemies who will attack in different ways, and you'll have to keep them all under control. You'll need to use the bits of relief in between slashes of your chainsword or power axe to take care of long-range attackers. You'll have to keep your distance from the suicide-bombing hog things, and so on. And probably the best thing about the combat, and this feels odd to say because the violence itself is a hell of a lot of fun, is the health system. You have a regenerative shield, but this is by no means a cover shooter. Beneath the shield is an actual health bar that you can regenerate by killing, and only by killing. Either by performing brutal, satisfying execution moves, or by activating Fury, a temporary state of near invulnerability and increased stopping power, accomplished by dealing large amounts of damage. This means that even though it's the most dangerous course of action, it's also undoubtedly the most rewarding course of action to run right into the middle of things and tear everything that moves limb from limb. But violence also needs to be aesthetically satisfying, and as evidenced by the footage I've put up, in Space Marine it really is. Like the roster of enemies, the selection of weaponry, with the exception of the chainsword, isn't all that creative, but it sure is the powerful, exaggerated stuff of super soldiers. The bolter, for example, is functionally the same as an assault rifle in any other game, but it fires far more forceful shots, explosive enough to destroy, say, entire heads. The gore is fittingly over the top and liberally applied as well. Watching enemies pulverize into a red mist when hit with a nearby explosion is a pleasure, and the aforementioned executions are doubly so. And thanks to some top-notch animation quality, everything about the combat flows together flawlessly. In terms of presentation, Space Marine pulls a lot of tricks from what seems like every current generation war shooter out there, but because of the intense gameplay and the Warhammer universe, it actually works out quite well. The story itself is, well, it exists, but what it lacks in complexity and intrigue, it more than makes up for in style. Even though the cutscenes mean almost nothing and simply move you from challenge to challenge, they're still enjoyable. The entire world is very alien, the characters are all English and very well voiced, and they use a lot of seemingly fake terms rooted in Latin. Normally I'd be rated games' reliance on cutscenes or other stretches devoid of gameplay to tell a story, especially among generic war shooters, but Space Marine actually sort of warrants them. Most war shooters have you sticking your head out from cover playing what is essentially a round of target practice, while this is much more demanding. Chances are that once you complete one of the tougher levels, you'll enjoy a cooldown period where you can watch a squad of strong men with stern yet soothing voices rambling on about space war things or sparring with one another. The game can slip up and go on too long without a conflict at times, with long stretches of walking or elevator riding because the environments are massive, but for the most part, thanks to the respite between combat segments, its pacing is fantastic. Even in the barest parts of the game, though, progressing never really becomes boring. The color palette is shooter gray and brown, but it makes sense on a world that is functionally a giant factory covered in desert. The visuals themselves are rich, comprised of astounding architecture and vast backdrops that are a wonder to take in. Even though the world itself is war-torn, half dead and half dying, the creative art design gives it quite an unexpected supply of life and distinction. Space Marine is an experience soaked in blood and stuffed with style. For those of you with hands prepped for strangling someone you know, it's a great tool to simmer you down, hitting especially close to home if your prospective victim has green skin. But for the rest of you who can keep yourselves calm in other ways, you'll still be doing yourselves a favor by picking up this wonderful third-person shooter.